Good Saturday afternoon, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to another Southern Oregon Weather Weekend Update. I've added a smoke forecast for this week because we've seen some pretty substantial fires in the Lassen area and in other places in California. So I wanted to talk about the short-term smoke forecast just for the next day or so. We'll talk about the rest of the upcoming week as well. We'll discuss our teleconnections and our latest ideas for next month. So first, here was the 10,000 foot wind pattern for this morning. You can see most of these barbs are showing north to northwest winds, and that's really helped push some of the smoke out of our area. You can see this was a result of the trough that moved through and gave us some respite from the triple-digit temperatures that we saw early last week. But this trough gave us northwest winds, and that pushed the smoke to our south and east. However, some models like the HRRR are showing that overnight and into Sunday morning, some of the smoke could creep back to the northwest. And the reason for that is if we look at our 10,000 foot winds, we can see that the flow has shifted to the south and southeast. As that trough departs, this ridge is going to pop back up over our area. And so we're going to get easterly flow on the eastern side of this ridge, so dry continental air, and then southerly flow to southeasterly flow from this area of low pressure to our south. And so that's going to help direct some of the smoke towards the Rogue Valley. Now, is this going to be thick ground level smoke? No. But we might see some haze in the upper levels of the atmosphere. I don't think this is going to last very long. As we head later into this coming week, we're going to see another trough, potentially. And so I don't think this is something we'll have to contend with for more than a few days. So let's talk about why we saw this trough come through. Well, we're currently in MJO Phase 2, and here's the correlation we would expect from Phase 2 in an ENSO-neutral pattern. Look at how well that map lines up with our current 500 millibar pattern. Ridge over the lakes, ridge off the west coast, trough moving through the Pacific Northwest and the northern plains. Very similar to the correlation we would expect from MJO Phase 2. And the RMM plot is showing that we are in Phase 2 as well. So that lines up really well. However, we are going to see a brief return of warmth as this ridge builds back. It's not going to last for very long because Phase 2 is kind of a transitional pattern between Phase 1, which looks a lot like this with the ridge over the northwest, and Phase 3, which is exactly the opposite with a trough along the west coast and over the Pacific Northwest. So it can still get hot for a time in Phase 2, but it's just not going to last very long, especially since there's some other factors that just don't favor prolonged periods of above normal temperatures. Another reason that we're going to see just a brief return to heat is this little blip in the PNA. You can see it turns positive just for a time as that ridge hangs out for just a day or two and gives us some triple-digit heat to start the week, and then we go right back into negative territory. Another reason why we're just seeing another brief resurgence of the heat is the SOI. We've talked about this in the past. It's the Southern Oscillation Index. Basically has to do with pressure patterns across the equatorial Pacific that affect the speed of the trade winds, the easterlies, and that give us more of an El Nino or a La Nina flavor to the atmosphere. In general, when the SOI is positive during the summertime and during the wintertime, that's a cooler and wetter signal for us. When it's negative, that's a warmer and drier signal. So you can see right now it's positive, but there's a lag to what the SOI does and its influence for weather in the United States. So there's about a 2.5 week lag. And so our current weather is not affected by these recent positives. It's affected by what happened 2.5 weeks ago around this time period during the first part of July when we saw the SOI dip for a time before rising again. So this dip lines up well with the heat that we saw early last week and the heat that we're going to see again early this week. So interesting to note. You can see that here on this temperature graph. Red is above normal, and you can see we've been above normal for a little while. That corresponds to the heat we saw early last week, and now we've dipped back to within normal, but we're going to get above normal again for a few days, and that's partly because of that SOI drop that we saw 2.5 weeks ago. Here is another way to visualize that correlation with a map. You can see a positive SOI gives us a trough, cooler and wetter conditions over the northwest. Of course, a negative SOI is the opposite. It gives us warmer and drier conditions. So, interesting to observe those correlations and to note that there is that 2.5 week lag. So, going forward, after this brief resurgence in the heat to start the week, what can we expect? Well, we see that the European ensemble is forecasting for another trough to reload in the Gulf of Alaska and impact our area. This is going to put us under more of a southwest flow pattern, so it will help to clear some of that smoke out if we do see some haze develop. It won't push it out of our area as decisively as if there was the northwest flow. But regardless, I think even if this trough is farther offshore, it will still help to clear the haze out of our area. So why do I think the European ensemble is going to be right? Well, here's the correlation we would expect from, you guessed it, the MJO again, this time MJO phase 3. It favors a trough over our area with a ridge elsewhere in the US. It's very similar to the European ensemble's forecast. And here we go. Here's the European model's forecast for the MJO. It's taking it into phase 3. So the European 500 millibar forecast agrees well with the European MJO forecast. Everything's lining up. So I think it's a pretty sure bet that we're going to see some hot days to start the week, and then we'll cool right back down later in the week. And once again, the PNA argues for this as well. We go positive for a little bit, and then negative again. And the SOI argues for this as well, a third or fourth factor. I'm just seeing the same signal for all of these teleconnections. We had this brief period of negative anomalies, and then the SOI immediately went positive again, which is a cooler signal. So it makes sense that this heat wouldn't last very long and that we'd cool right back down. Here's all that information presented by the Weather Channel. This infograph is really easy to interpret, but you wouldn't get all of the behind-the-scenes look at the teleconnections and why this forecast makes sense. Here's today, then we warm up Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and then we cool back down through the middle and end of the week. So looking farther ahead into August, I think we can expect somewhat of a repeat of July, in that I'm not seeing any signals for extended periods of above or below average temperatures. I think we could start the month a little bit above average. Here, as the calendar turns to August, we could still be under the influence of this trough, but as we move into the first week of August, I think we could come under the influence of this ridge, and that could hang out for a time. But then as we move into the middle of the month, I think we could see some cooler times. So that's kind of a repeat of what we saw in July, right? We had cooler temperatures to start the month and then some warmer times during the middle of the month. So here is that ridge forecast to build during the middle and end of the first week of August. I think that's a valid idea by the European ensemble. And one of the reasons for that is because, once again, of the SOI. There's kind of a roller coaster pattern. Positive, negative, positive. The atmosphere doesn't quite know what to do, and I think that's because we're in a transition between an El Nino and a La Nina. So because of this roller coaster pattern in the SOI, we can't really expect prolonged above average or below average conditions. We're just going to see some cooler times and some warmer times. And it might seem like that's what the weather does all the time, but there are some years that have just been consistently above average because the atmosphere has been in an El Nino-like state throughout the summertime. Or the opposite. We've had years that have been consistently cooler than average because we've seen negative SOI anomalies for a good portion of the summer. This year, it's a mixed bag. We're seeing positive and negative anomalies. And so it makes sense that we'll see a warmer week here and then a cooler week there. So I think that could be the story for August as well. That seems like a reasonable bet to me. Really quickly before we end, the atmospheric angular momentum, basically the strength of the global jet. It's been negative for quite a while, which gives us a cooler look. Models are still trying to take it positive. I think that could finally happen. And if so, that would give us somewhat of a warmer look. But you can see at least the CFS V2 isn't keeping it positive for very long. And the positive anomalies are not very large. So again, I think this favors, again, this roller coaster idea of warmer times and cooler times. Overall, I think August could be a pretty average and pleasant month if you like summer weather. So let's wrap this up. It looks like we could see some short-term haze return. Again, I don't think it'll be thick ground level smoke that will really obscure visibility that much, but we could see some upper level haze because we're seeing winds that are going to come out of the south and southeast instead of the north. I don't think that's going to last very long because of the trough that will clear out our air later this coming week. First, though, we do have some triple-digit heat to contend with. Again, that's because of what the SOI did earlier in July and because of that little rise in the PNA. However, cooler weather immediately returns later in the week. Once again, because of the SOI, didn't stay negative for very long. It went right back positive in the middle of July. And our PNA is going to drop off, and that's also a cooler signal. Looking ahead to August, it looks like we could see some warmer times during week 1 and then some cooler conditions mid-month. Again, because of that Southern Oscillation Index and angular momentum roller coaster that we've been seeing over the past month. The atmosphere just doesn't really know what to do. Is it La Nina? Is it an El Nino? Again, I think that's because we're in this transition time between an El Nino and a La Nina, which it looks like we could see heading into the upcoming winter. And in the next couple weeks, if the forecasts continue to hold for a La Nina, we can talk about what that might mean for us. Still early to consider a winter forecast, though, so it'll be a couple weeks before I start talking about that. So guys, thanks so much for tuning in. Don't forget to set your notifications so you can see that next weekend update as soon as it's ready. And please leave a like if you enjoyed the forecast for today.